Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. Today on the show, what's the key to building a Detroit where longtime Black residents can truly thrive?
The city's Reparations Task Force has some answers, and they're more comprehensive than many other plans across the nation.
Also, the minimal, infectious sound of the White Stripes, and why this hometown favorite just secured a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And trust in the media and news has long been declining in America. We'll look at where that trust is building and eroding for Black communities in the Rust Belt.
We begin in our favorite Rust Belt city, right here in Detroit, where in 2021, residents voted to create a reparations task force. The goals include creating housing and economic programs to repair harms against Black Detroiters who've been here for at least 20 years. When reparations are discussed, the conversation is often about money. But the recent report released by Detroit's Reparations Task Force goes well beyond cash payments. If what's laid out is ever implemented, it would radically transform the lives of many, many Black Detroiters. It would create job opportunities, transform health outcomes. It would remove scarcity and friction in people's daily lives. It would do so in part by creating two city departments, one dedicated to the cultural prosperity of Black residents, and another meant to repair harms created by past government entities, be them national, state, and local. We'll talk a little about the possibilities of implementing something like this, how it could impact Black residents and the city more broadly. But mostly, we want to focus on the Reparations Task Force and what it produced. Why does housing get so much time and attention in creating justice? Why are former Black Detroit residents excluded from direct benefits? And how did constructing such a document change the people who worked on it? To discuss this, we have Cidney Calloway here. She's the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. Cidney, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So this is important, heavy stuff we're talking about. It's American history with a particular focus on the systemic brutality committed against African Americans. What's your connection like with Detroit, and how has it changed over the process of you creating this report?
Absolutely. So I'm honored and very proud to say I am a native Detroiter born here on the west side in the beautiful North Rosedale Park. I grew up here and had the opportunity to graduate from a Detroit public school, the wonderful, illustrious Detroit School of Arts. And this entire process, it really impacted not only the way I saw my community, but also the way that I carried myself. And I had to do a lot of unlearning and relearning in order to really shift my mentality and to ensure that I was having effective and constructive conversations with not only my neighbors, because I don't like just calling them community members, my neighbors and my family and friends, but also how I held these conversations with those who had the power to make a difference.
Cidney, I think for a lot of us, unlearning is a really important part of our progression as human beings. Can you talk a little bit more about what that unlearning looked like?
Yeah, so during my early career in the financial industry, I was working on a lot of really amazing things for people. So buying second homes in beautiful Florida and out on the West Coast. And while that was happening, I was at my desk just reading the news of what was happening. So it was like the bubbling up of the police brutality movement in like the early 2014, 15, 16s. And while I was there, just having those conversations with people who were in the position to buy second homes while my neighbors and while people that looked like me, Black people, were struggling and being murdered in the streets at the hands of those who were supposed to be protecting us, I just got curious about why this was happening throughout our nation. Why was this a repetitive occurrence? And the more curious I became, the more I started to learn and realize some things, that this is a systemic struggle that too many of us Black people are facing. And then, of course, that led me down a rabbit hole to really start looking at the web of disinvestment and the web of systemic racism and just bias and bigotry that we unfortunately have been facing for the duration of Black people being in this country. So it was a very tough transformation that I underwent. But I wouldn't trade it for the world, just because there's so much that I learned, right? I was raised in North Orchard Park, and that's associated with the middle class. So I was very privileged to not only attend every type of school, like parochial private and parochial charter, and then going on to suburban public, and then coming back to urban public. I got to experience those disparities in real time, unbeknownst to me at the time. But in retrospect, it gave me an opportunity to really give some anecdotal evidence to why I have the privilege to start fighting for and advocating for my neighbors.
So America's racial reckoning really was a personal reckoning for you as well. And it sounds like it helped to set the foundation for a lot of what is in this report. I mean, this report notes the deeper historical things like slavery in Detroit, but you also bring things up to today. You explore how anti-Blackness was woven into local policies like emergency management, the dismantling of the public school system, illegal tax foreclosures, and water shutoffs. In bringing up things that have happened within the last decade, were you attempting to make a connection between racist policies of the past and how they've bled into those of the present? And it sounds like, again, this personal moment for you was a big part of how you proceeded with this, with these recommendations.
Absolutely. So again, with me being a native Detroiter, my family was swept up in the mortgage burst of the early 2008s. Like, I was graduating, or not graduating, but I was celebrating my Sweet 16 in my childhood home that my family purchased in 1993. And then the very next year, I had to move. And that kind of set me into a nomadic sort of lifestyle, because I've been moving every year since then up until like literally last year. And that's because we lost that home. And mind you, my parents are master's degree holders, Juris Doctorates holders, so they can read the agreements for purchasing their homes, and they can get into the fine print. But knowing that we got swept up in that, you only take a step back and realize, like, if they are capable to comprehend the contracts that they're signing, and then they still get swept up in this, it's like, how did this happen? And in the process of putting this report together, our task force, we read quite a few books, because of course we know we don't know everything, especially with me being the youngest person on the task force. I came in willing and ready to learn and absorb a lot of wisdom and a lot of experiences that I didn't get to firsthand, be a part of or experience or observe. And in those books, it's just so well documented, the harms, right? And it might not have been directly at the hands of the city, but the city was complacent in a lot of the things that happened to our community in the early 30s, 40s, and 50s, like just allowing mob action to happen in front of Dr. Ossian Sweet's home, and the fight and the struggle to get into the Sojourner Truth homes on the east side, the construction of the Burwood Wall that still stands today. So there has to be some sort of connection to the present day, because of a lot of the policies that were enacted around housing at that time kind of, it really stunted our wealth development. And then going into today's day and age, we're experiencing some zip codes that are dealing with astronomical numbers of people dealing with asthma because of the location of their homes, and them not having the wealth to move away from these developments, or to even really pay attention to the conversation surrounding these developments, right? I always say that political participation, unfortunately, can be a privilege, because a lot of us are in survival mode. We're going to work to ensure that we can feed our families, so we can't sit and have these kind of constructive or even critical conversations about politics and the policies and legislation that's happening in our cities that directly impact our lives, because we don't have the time. So those are the combinations and connections. Like if we had that wealth and we didn't have to worry about housing, then perhaps we can reallocate that time to something like politics and the political conversations that happen around new developments and the establishments of education systems and so on and so forth.
Right. So participating in politics can sometimes be a luxury. Do you think that that's why Detroit has a lower voter turnout? Do you connect that with a high rate of poverty and the fact that a lot of people are simply trying to survive?
Somewhat. So a lot of people in the city are kind of aware of politics, but when it comes to actually participating, like actively participating, like going down to our formal sessions on a 10 a.m. at Tuesday, knowing you have to be there around like 9 o'clock if you'd like to give, public comment, that's a privilege, right? And then because you're not directly seeing the impact or you can't witness the impact of political decisions on your life, you get jaded and you think and start to believe that your vote doesn't count. So why even waste the time? It's so intertwined, and being able to think about how intertwined it is a luxury.
And given we're talking about politics and you noted your parents have higher education degrees, I should note that your mom is Detroit City Council member Angela Whitfield Calloway. We're going to talk about some of the conversations that you have had with her about these reparation recommendations. But I also want to think for a moment about something else that you said when it comes to the struggles that Detroit has faced as a city. I mean, some people listening to this might think, well, Detroit spent its money poorly. That's why the city fell into bankruptcy, which then caused all these other problems and austerity measures for people. Even former Mayor Coleman Young believed that the city needed to change how it was spending in the 1990s to prevent bankruptcy from happening. So what do you make of this perspective that suggests that the reason bad things have happened to Black Detroiters has been more about bad leadership than systemic anti-Black racism?
So the bankruptcy is a tough spot for quite a few of us in the city. And if you think about what happened back in 2013 under Governor Snyder, the emergency management, it had a really detrimental impact, and it was tough for us to read about the bankruptcy and about the emergency management because we started looking at all these other cities. I think almost every majority Black city in the state of Michigan has been under emergency management, but that there are other municipalities that were worse off than some of those cities. And so the targeting of it all, it's just a little strategic, especially understanding the type of assets that we lost during that bankruptcy. And we didn't lose them technically. They were kind of taken from us. There were ways to get around the debt that we owed. And the fact that they kind of called all that debt due at the same time, knowing that's not how debt works. Right. And I think that was a bit unfair for the city of Detroit. It's like, yes, we're in debt, but we don't have to pay every single bill to every single lender or however that worked at the same time. And that's even how consumer debt works. So the fact that we had to enter into that under Kevin Orr, it put a terrible cloud over our city and sent us into this kind of dark period, because not only did it question our management, but then it also questioned Black people's capability and right to govern themselves and to govern in general. And I think that's the question that kind of bubbled up from the root of it.
So what we saw was a Black city run by Black folks, and then we saw state leaders, a state run by white people, and they came in and said, you don't know how to do this, and we're taking over. And the effects were quite damaging. Mm-hmm. So all of this is a big part of the backdrop as we think about the ways that cities and states interact with each other, and cities, states, and national entities as well. You brought 13 minds together on this task force, all with different perspectives and experiences, though it sounds like that was something that was uniting, is everyone understanding some of what you and I have talked about so far. You're a leader on the task force and the youngest member. How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 33.
Okay.
I was 30 when I started the process.
And what's the age range of the other folks?
So our eldest member, I believe, is 80, in her 80s. The beautiful Dr. Gloria Aneb House, who is a well-documented and published author in the city. So it was a beautiful range, an intergenerational success journey and project that I am so grateful to have had. I'm just so grateful to have been a part of it, because, mind you, these are some of our scholars who teach at U of M and teach at Wayne State and are principals of our Detroit public schools. So there's just this wealth of knowledge, and then working with academics, they poured so much into me and reassured me that I was doing a good job as their leader. So that was the age range, and it was a powerful experience.
Can you talk about how you all were bringing some different perspectives, though? I mean, you've got some folks who have this long time, painful, nuanced, historical perspective, and then someone like yourself who was undergoing her own awakening about everything. But at the same time, you have your own wisdom and knowledge to bring to the understanding of anti-Black racism today.
Yeah. So I believe it was my curiosity, because I would always just ask questions, because, mind you, I wasn't born for a lot of what may have happened that really impacted the history of this city. But then also, as an abolitionist and as an advocate and an activist, I bring a creativity and an innovation, right? I bring a lot of energy. And I think that's what really got us on the same page, was me asking a lot of questions. And then I learned that this entire conversation surrounding reparations is a yes and conversation. Initially, when you think of reparations, you immediately go to history and you look at slavery, and everybody thinks the only compensation should be financial or monetary. And we would be remiss if we didn't touch on the other effects of our lives that are impacted by the need for reparations. So I think it was just really the yes and conversation. Like, yes, we need money, but also we need, our health care, and we need our quality of life to improve, so we can focus on how to really get our students back into the joys of learning and the joys of education. And then just really paying respects to the culture of the city and making sure that our cultural institutions are sustained. So it was really just a big, robust conversation that happened every Tuesday night from 5:30 to 7:30. Pardon me. And then some days on Saturdays, we would be together from 10 to 4. So it was a lot of bonding, a lot of camaraderie, and a lot of really good, candid conversation, because there were some even principal disagreements, or just not even disagreements, but just alignments that needed to happen. So we'd understand about why someone's really strong about the dismantling of the DDA, and then why another is really strong about figuring out, or the Downtown Development Authority, and then really trying to figure out our water system and how our Detroit Water and Sewage Department ended up under the Great Lakes Water Authority. So it's just so many different passions in the room, and making sure they were all represented, because our task force members also came representing different communities and different just areas of the city. And there are differences between like the districts and what their priorities are.
You're speaking more to this local causal chain that you're able to connect in these recommendations. I mean, it's much sharper than in many other municipal reports of its kind. It's very focused on how Detroit residents how their lives can be better in terms of improving what's going on in this city. I want to think about Detroit a little bit more in this moment and your relationship with it, because When we think about reparations, it brings something to mind by Heather McGhee. She's the author of The Sum of Us, and she writes about the ways that anti-Black racism has hurt not just Black people, but all people in some ways. For example, we don't have great public transit or better access to health care. And if society wasn't anti-Black, she argues, we would be more likely to have these things. When talking about solutions to this problem, she suggests we should dive deeper into the histories of the localities where we live. And that's so that we can make repairs, but also just to understand what has happened in these places. And she believes that would bring people closer to the places they live. I wonder if this has happened to you, if you've become closer to Detroit by being on this task force.
Oh, absolutely. And it's quite amazing, to be honest. Again, when I was activated as an activist and abolitionist in 2016, sitting at my desk in the financial realm and watching the news reporting these police brutality moments, I was dealing with elitism, and I was dealing with a bit of pretentiousness growing up in North Rosedale Park and going to school out in like West Bloomfield and coming back to DPS and then going off to a public white institution for college. I did see myself as better than my neighbors on the other side of the Southfield Freeway. And it shames me to think about it. But the more that I learned about how decisions were made and how you can only make a good decision if you have the opportunity to make those good decisions, right? You can only have the choices that you have, the hand that you're dealt. But if that hand was tainted and corrupted prior to you getting that hand, if somebody was pulling out those best cards, then you're stuck with what you're stuck with. And that's what systemic racism has done, even on a local level. There are some instances where our mass transit would literally provide opportunities to not only jobs and education, but experience, right? We're talking about cultural experience outside of the city of Detroit, or even at the further parts of the city of Detroit, because a lot of people forget how large the city is, and the fact that we have two separate municipalities inside our borders and boundaries. Having access to every inch of the city and even beyond into our metro Detroit area would provide a lot of people an opportunity to shift their mentalities around the possibilities of what their life could look like and what's really out there. This racism prevents a lot of amazing development for not only Black people, but those that live amongst Black people. And it's unfortunate to witness and see, because I was privileged enough to be able to go out to school in West Bloomfield because my parents had, vehicles, and then I eventually got my own. But depending on a bus service is an unfathomable idea. And even, our small track systems, right? 3.1 miles isn't going to get you very far, not even to the edge of the city of Detroit, let alone into the suburbs. So it definitely has an overwhelming negative impact and a detrimental impact on our entire community outside of just the Black people.
This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Cidney Calloway. She's the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. We're discussing the report that the task force just released, outlining the harms that Black Detroiters incurred and recommendations for how the city should remedy those harms. And we'll get into some of those recommendations next. We're going to take a short break now. WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. In 2021, Detroit residents voted to create a reparations task force. The goals include creating housing and economic programs to repair harms against Black Detroiters who've been here for at least 20 years. We're discussing what those harms were and what the task force believes the city needs to do to repair those harms. That includes creating a Detroit Office of African American Cultural Programs and a Detroit Reparations Administration Office. I'm speaking with Cidney Calloway. She's the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. Now, Cidney, there are a lot of recommendations that you have for repairing past harms done to Black Detroiters. But broadly, you want to create two city departments, as I've mentioned. One is the Detroit Office of African American Cultural Programs, and that's meant to provide funding, meeting spaces, and other supports so Black Detroiters can pursue the arts. Why is this office important for repair?
Yes. So Black people in the arts have a very intimate relationship, as we know with this being Motown. And it's integral to our mental health that we have a way to express ourselves and to accurately record and relay and even translate what's happening around us through the arts. So it's inevitable that we establish something like this to not only preserve what has already happened in the city, to ensure that the future generations have access to it, but to also encourage creativity and innovation. Because without the arts and without the humanities, we end up in a very scary society with no creativity and no space for empathy, sympathy, and just those nurturing components of humanity. So we have to ensure that our museums are sustained. We have to ensure that any programming to increase our creativity exposure is sustained. And this is just one way to do it, to ensure that we are supporting those who may not join us in the traditional sense of the word in the working realm, but to make sure that they understand that they're supported and that there's a space for them here as we transform into a tech and industrial city.
Right. I mean, there is always, and there always has been, the concern of Detroit's arts and culture getting commodified. The fact that this is a Black city, that it is the heartbeat of so much, and yet sometimes what's made here can be commodified, can be exploited. And so this is a way to truly empower and connect Black Detroiters with the legacy that so many Black Detroiters before them have built.
Absolutely. It's the amplification of what was before us and what's to come, making sure that everyone understands that they have a space here, a safe space and a protected space for them to express themselves however they see fit.
Now, the other department is the Detroit Reparations Administration Office, and that one has much more to do with doing direct material repair work. And so that includes compensating people for prosperity loss and water liens, increasing Black home ownership, creating jobs for Black Detroiters, and improving public spaces in historically disinvested neighborhoods. Talk about how this department would work with the city council and the mayor to enact policies in Detroit.
Yeah, so it be more of a liaison type position, because we understand that raising the funds to sustain the idea of monetary repayments for reparations, there's a lot of distrust with the city and the handling of some budget lines, knowing that reallocations can happen during budget season. And again, that privilege of paying attention to politics, your money that they told you would go to one place could end up somewhere else. So this Reparations Administration Office would be responsible for really holding the coffer of the funds that we raise through grants from corporations and banks that are held accountable, but also collecting free fees from the Detroit casinos and tourist tax and clawback. So it would give them a separate account that wouldn't necessarily be that couldn't be or shouldn't be impacted by the budgetary decisions of the administration in office. So it's a little bit of a protection and a reassurance opportunity to let Black people know that, yes, we really, truly do want to see this money come directly to you, and we trust you to use this as you see fit.
So the report doesn't just say the city should pay for it. It suggests some of these discrete revenue sources that you've mentioned here. So I want to acknowledge some of those. So you mentioned casino surcharges, and then also sports and entertainment taxes, clawbacks, vendor contributions, and reallocated police spending with explicit ties to a reparations trust fund. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's just a real opportunity because this demographic of the city is so unique in the reparations movement in space. As a 75-80% Black city, if we tried to capture any taxes for real, it would be us repaying ourselves. So we would end up zeroing out. We had to get creative in how we would raise these funds and how we would sustain these programs and ideas. And that would be the entertainment taxes, because we're one of very few cities in the nation to have all 4 major sports teams, and then also within a 1 mile radius, square mile. So just making sure that we are getting creative again and innovative with the way that we raise these funds to ensure that it's implemented and it's impacting our target demographic.
Right. It's keeping the money right here in the hands of Black Detroiters. Let's talk about direct repairs that the task force suggests implementing. They include everything from police reforms to a moratorium on residential water shutoffs to more funding for public schools and creating more Black-owned grocery co-ops. But I think the biggest focus you all have is housing. Why?
Well, once upon a time in the city of Detroit, we repped the largest Black homeowner percentage in the nation, and it was because we had so many families in beautiful homes, and it's depleted to a point that we've become a majority renter city for the first time in such a long time. And it's heartbreaking, because that is like the basis of generational wealth, at least having a parcel and a home. So housing is absolutely our number one focus, just because so many Detroiters experienced owning a home and having a family home, and now again that nomadic lifestyle of moving from space to space and facing rent increases and dealing with slumlords or landlords who don't live anywhere near you. So we found that housing might be the basis and the foundation for building a stable life, right? Not having to worry about where you're going to lay your head allows you to free up mental capacity to focus on other things. And we understand that your house and your home, it speaks to your humanity, right? It gives you a sense of pride, and it gives you a sense of dignity. And we want to restore the dignity of our Detroiters who may have faced foreclosures, and help them understand that we know what it's like to go to experience that. Because again, my family unfortunately got caught up in that. And reading Professor Bernadette Atua-Hene's book Plundered enraged me a bit, and I still have yet to finish that book, just because of how she brought so much together, the narrative in a family's story, but then also the data behind it and the factual component of how this impacted not only Detroit but Wayne County as a whole. So housing was our number one, and economic development was our number two, because those are the umbrellas that cover pretty much everything in this city. And that also answers the question on the ballot. So we wanted to make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable to the people who voted to have this question answered about housing and economic development.
I mean, this is an acknowledgement, as you mentioned, that nothing is a more powerful force in creating generational wealth than housing. So to improve that kind of access for folks, and then it's also this anchoring force that could really be transformative. There's a lot wrapped up in housing, including a $40,000 grant for a home down payment, home repair grants, more city money toward housing construction, and refunding property owners who lost their homes due to tax foreclosure. But you also have cash payments here. Do you have an idea of how much money Black residents should receive?
You know, it's hard to really put a single figure on it, just because of the amount of equity that has been lost. And we can't really account for the possibilities of what their wealth may have looked like had they had the opportunity to retain their homes. So it's difficult to say. We can give them perhaps the value of the property that they lost because that's documented, if we can find that documentation. And we can give them the equity, but we cannot give them the amount of money that they could have accumulated had they had time to focus on other opportunities instead of worrying about their housing, if you're following what I'm saying. Yeah. You never know what the trajectory of their lives could have looked like had they been able to keep that home in their family. It would have given them an opportunity to perhaps get a loan on that equity of their home to start a business, or get a loan to pay for a better education experience, or you never know, right? So it's hard to kind of pinpoint it. But the basis of what we want to do is at least acknowledge the fact that there was money lost, and an attempt at making them whole would be the $40,000 for the purchase of a home, or the cash payments for those who were overtaxed to the tune of $600 million that apparently has just evaporated into thin air, which, does not make sense. Right. So there is no single figure because every story is different and every experience was different. So they vary quite a bit, but we at least want to give them a base number, a starting line.
We're talking about some major work that you all are suggesting. And so the task force hopes to create the reparations department in the next 10 years. Why did you put that timeline on it?
I think it was to really just expedite the process, right? We don't want this report to be the end all be all, but we also don't want it to sit on the shelf. And I feel like a lot of administrations and a lot of our city leadership, they'll allow things to kind of decay, and we want to put that hard restraint on there so that there's some gumption and there's some movement and momentum, especially in this day and age. So that office, it has to be formed because, again, implementing and further envisioning of these programming and the sustaining of these programs, it's going to take a lot of time. Like, this report could have been even more so robust if I had the opportunity to do this as my 9 to 5, right? If I could really spend my entire day and not just my excess energy after work focusing on what this looks like. And it would give us time to really build out what these repair grants could look like, or really build out what the application for and what the eligibility could look like. And then really getting into the math and being able to sit with individual families, bringing us their stories, or even just doing the genealogical work of finding their ancestors to ensure that they are eligible. So it's things like that really brought us to the point, like, wow, we really do need an office, because 2 hours on a Tuesday and a couple of hours on every sporadic Saturday is not enough time to fully flush out our ideas, but then also to communicate with our neighbors about what they're envisioning as well, because the 13 of us can't speak for the close to 500,000 Black people that live in this city. And we don't know everybody's stories. And of course, we've had some amazing partnerships over the duration of this journey with the Black Bottom Archives and with the history, our harms report done by the University of Michigan, and our impact analysis done by Columbia University and the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center out of Howard Law and the African American Redress Network. But listening to our local experts with, We the People of Detroit, and there were a couple other huge organizations that really just brought us so much information because they do this every day. So it just takes a lot of time. And that's why we're like, we need this office so we can continue this work, because this is step one.
Right. Repairing historical harms of this magnitude, as you've noted, cannot just be a part-time job. There are so many different voices that it sounds like you were working with and stitching into this tapestry. One thing you mentioned, Cidney, that I want to go back to was eligibility. And I think the eligibility criteria is interesting and important. So someone has to be a descendant of an African enslaved in the U.S. or the diaspora. They have to be at least 21 years old, and a current resident of Detroit who has been a resident for at least 20 years. How did you come up with these terms for who should be entitled to reparations?
So this eligibility conversation, I believe, happened in almost every single meeting over the span of the last years, just because of how provocative this conversation was. And it was a lot of our own experience and the things that happened in our families that kind of inspired some of these stipulations. I know with me, being a descendant of an African enslaved in the U.S. or in the diaspora, for a lot of us, it's hard to prove just because we end up running into that 1860 block when it comes to our records, because we weren't recorded as human beings until the 1800s. We were just, cattle. So it was just male, female, this age, and that was it. So there were very few names, but there are ways to find these things. And so we were trying to make sure that it was simple enough to encourage as many people as possible to apply. But then we also didn't really want to open up the door to kind of like a reparations, I don't want to say like nomad, because that's been like the word of the hour, but like the person who just kind of chases reparations, like 3 to 5 years, I'm going to move to this city, say I've lived here for so long, I can prove that I am a descendant of an enslaved in the nation, and then I claim reparations, because realistically, it's difficult to financially sustain that, or it's not really a feasible idea. So we did want to make it realistic, so then that way administrations couldn't really find a loophole that would allow them not to implement anything. But then we also wanted to make sure that it was impactful enough on our community. So being at 21 years old, you are in that last year of college, hopefully, or you're starting your career, and within a couple of years, you're looking to buy your first home and starting to really put your roots down in the city. And I know that some of these programs could assist with bringing that dream to life, or bringing that dream to fruition. So getting the 3 points down and trying to make it as simple as possible to encourage application, and then making it simple enough for people to be considered and to really participate in the programs. I think that's how we got here. But it was a lot of conversation about, well, my family moved out and we moved back, and we were forced out and then moved back, or they grew up here and they experienced these things here, but they no longer live here, and they've been, out in, Iowa for the last 50 years. So would they really be eligible for reparations? So it was a difficult conversation, a very long and drawn out conversation. We did have some community input because we did put out an eligibility survey, and these were the items that were at the top of the priority list for our neighbors.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Cidney Calloway. She's the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. We're discussing the report that the task force just released, outlining the harms Black Detroiters incurred and recommendations for how the city should remedy those harms. We'll continue the conversation after a short break. Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. In 2021, Detroit residents voted to create a reparations task force. The goals included creating housing and economic programs to repair harms against Black Detroiters who've been here for at least 20 years. We're discussing what those harms were and what the task force believes the city needs to do to repair those harms. That includes creating a Detroit Office of African American Cultural Programs and a Detroit Reparations Administration Office. I've been speaking with Cidney Calloway. She's the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. Cidney, as we mentioned earlier, your mom is on the Detroit City Council. That's Councilmember Angela Whitfield Calloway. Did you have to have hard conversations with her about her leadership when developing this report?
A little bit, but not as difficult as I anticipated them being, because my mother she carries herself as a resident more than a politician. And she's always advocating for her neighbors. So she absolutely understood the need for a lot of the programming, and she was excited about it and still is very excited about it. She attended a majority of our meetings in the first year. So she was in the crowd, in the audience, asking those questions of me about the creativity process and about the innovative process. So I appreciate her support and her being transparent and visible to her constituents, knowing that there was support coming from the administration at the time. So no, the conversations were not hard. And for anybody that pays attention to city council and the formal sessions, my mother has never been shy of those tough conversations, because she keeps her neighbors and herself at the forefront of her mind when making very difficult decisions when it comes to legislation and when it comes to contracts from developers, because she never removes herself from her neighborhood. She was like, I'm still a Detroiter, so everything that I'm looking at is going to directly impact me. So it's not just on behalf of, and she's not removing herself, she's fighting for herself and for her neighbors.
There is no doubt that Council Member Whitfield Calloway has a strong voice. I'm wondering if she gave you any advice that has really stuck with you while you were working through this process.
Yeah, I think it was just keep going and understanding that this is not the end all be all. It's a provocative topic. It's a controversial topic, particularly in this day and age in our political society. So it was just keep going and then read everything. She's an avid reader, and she instilled in us, because she was an English major at Spelman College, to read everything and really read to comprehend. And I think that's what we did on the task force. Again, my book collection grew by at least 20 books, and of those 20, I can say that I read cover to cover about five of them, just because some of the others, the topics and the content was a bit heavy. But having the support of my mother and the support of my family throughout this entire process, and having so many different representatives from different sectors in my family to have these conversations around the kitchen table really helped formulate some of my ideas and the way that I engaged with the task force and with my neighbors in our public sessions. So I'm extremely grateful to my family and their support, and extremely grateful to my neighbors and their support, the way they came out during those public sessions and sat with us for 2 hours. There were a couple of times where the conversations did get a bit heated and passionate, but the reminder that we're all on the same team and we're no longer and I believe we're heading out of the justification era of the reparations movement, but we're really heading into the itemization era of the reparations movement. So it was good conversations like that I had with her, and just letting her know how city processes work, right?
Cidney,
and how we have to really garner public.
Forgive me for jumping in. We are about to run out of time here, and there are a few last crucial questions I want to get to. As briefly as you can, what are the next steps for the task force, if anything?
Yes, so we are going to present to City Council formally during a formal session coming up soon. We don't have that date just yet, but we are really pushing public support. So we are hoping to take this on a bit of a tour around the city to really sit with the public and our community members to get their feedback, because it's going to take us supporting this report in order to get some ideas passed.
I think there's an idea that these repairs will just help Black folks, that supporting housing and health and good food, specifically targeting Black Detroiters, will only reach Black Detroiters. But I want to end on this notion that Black Detroiters don't live in a vacuum. I wonder what you think about the collective benefits that could be had if we made some or all of these investments.
Yes, so again, it would just be that opportunity for us to fully participate in society with no obstacles or very few obstacles. And it was just, it's the best thing for our economy, knowing that the Black population is a huge consumer population, and giving us an opportunity to not only participate as consumers, but participate as producers in this society, and allowing us to build those grocery stores in a lot of areas outside of the downtown area or even the Midtown Cass Corridor area. It's just better for our health, and it would be better for our participation in society. So as the tide rises, all boat rises. I do believe in that.
When you walk around Detroit, do you imagine it differently, having done this report? Do you imagine more businesses, more art, more engagement?
Absolutely. It's restored my hope in this city because, again, being a high schooler downtown or off of Woodward and playing hooky down to the river, watching the transformation of Campus Marshes and the surrounding areas has restored my hope. So I'm not moving out of the city, and I'm going to encourage as many of my peers as possible to bring their professionalism and to plant themselves here in the city to ensure we can sustain and substantially impact our area.
Cidney Calloway is the co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. It just released its recommendations for reparative justice for Detroit residents. Cidney, thank you so much for joining me on the Metro.
It was an honor.
Coming up, we'll dissect the early days of the newest Detroit act to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's next here on the Metro. Stay with us.